Just before this episode, here's how you can get more from Never a Truer Word. If you're listening to this podcast on Spotify, you can subscribe to this channel to get early access to the weekly analysis episodes, video episodes so you can see the statements as I analyse them, and exclusive content too. And if you're here on YouTube, then become a member of the channel to get early access to everything and exclusive content not available anywhere else. Hello and welcome to Never a Truer Word, where we look at the words that people choose to use to see if they're telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And we're here with the case of JonBenét Ramsey. I think potentially one of the biggest unsolved cases as we know it. JonBenét was age 6 when she was murdered inside her home on Christmas night 1996 or early the next morning 1996. Lots of theories abound, but no one knows who did it. What happened to JonBenét Ramsey? There are lots of theories around her family. Was her dad John involved? The mum Patsy, the brother Burke, even, who was 9 years old at the time. He's come in for a lot of suspicion and a lot of looking at Burke. Or was it something else entirely? An intruder, someone known to the Ramseys? We may find out a little bit more in this episode. There are so many theories. This episode may well back up your theories. It may well make you think again, or it might make you mad because it doesn't back up your theory. But what we're going to do here, and what we always do in Never a Truer Word, is look at the words that people choose to use. Now, at the time of recording, there's a new Netflix documentary out looking at the case of JonBenét Ramsey, and JonBenét's dad, John Ramsey, has given some interviews around that as well. One of them is the one I'm going to look at. It's with Crime Junkie. It's an hour and a half long interview. That means there's so much we can get just from looking at the words that John Ramsey uses. Now, I can't look at the entire interview in this episode. It's an hour and a half long. That would take way too long for us to break down step by step by step, although I would love to do that. Instead, I'm going to pull out some of the themes. So if you're a regular here, this is something a bit different where I'm going to start at the end. I've watched the episode, I've broken it down, all 1.5 hours of it, and I've used theme analysis. The theory behind that is that when we talk, especially when we talk for a long time, then looking at the themes that we repeat, the words that we repeat, the concepts that we repeat, they can reveal a lot about what is inside our head and what the priority is. So that is what I have done with John Ramsey in this hour and a half long interview. We'll go into a deep dive into some of the things he says, but first, here's what I noticed across that whole hour and a half. John Ramsey has perfect recall about these events 28 years ago at the time of recording. He has perfect recall on events of that time when it suits him. When it gets his point across, he's pin sharp on what went down. At other times, when there's a bit of a high pressure question put to him, how could this have happened? All of a sudden, he mentions that it was chaos that day, that I can't really remember what happened. It was a long time ago. Interesting. In this interview, John Ramsey talks about Burke, the son that survived. He's still around today. He talks about Burke way more than he talks about JonBenet. We'll look at why that might be as we go through this episode. John Ramsey likes to divert the conversation from this high-stress conversation and talking about the murder of your daughter, no matter what your involvement is in it, is going to be high stress. And he likes to divert away into things that are much easier, much more comfortable for him to talk about, like business, like money. He was a businessman. He had a lot of money, although he claims he didn't, bizarrely. He likes to divert away into subjects like that. John Ramsey makes lots of mentions of friends of the family. I heard it's been said that he's a very sociable person, but certainly he talks a lot about friends, a lot about his friends. And interestingly, he blames or excuses a lot of his actions, good and bad actions, and his choices on friends and advice from friends and what friends were saying to him. We'll see a bit of that in this episode as well. In this episode, and every time I've seen John Ramsey speak, he has a lot of issues with the police investigation. It's an unsolved case. For 28 years, his daughter has been murdered, and it's never been said by the police what happened, and he has a lot of issues with that. But His issues don't seem to be verbalized that they have not found the killer, they have not found the person that murdered my daughter has received no justice. No, his issues with the police investigation were the suspicion that were put on him and his wife, Patsy, at the time. That's very interesting. It's not quite what we would expect. And throughout this 1.5 hour interview with John Ramsey by Crime Junkie, he has an insane lack of curiosity. He knows what happened to him, he knows his part in it, but when it's said to him, did you ask Burke about this? Did you ask your friend about this? He says, no, I didn't ask. He has an insane lack of curiosity into what happened to his daughter, JonBenét Ramsey. Right, are you ready for some breakdown? Let's look at the first question and answer that I want to look at. And this is him being asked about suspicion being on his wife, Patsy, JonBenét's mum.
Why is it her that everyone became fixated on?
Patsy was a very strong woman. Maybe didn't come across so good on television, I was told by people. But she was a wonderful mother. She's a wonderful stepmother. And I never heard her say anything negative about anybody. She's just a good person. And so for her to take the brunt of that assault is just so unfair. When we lost JonBenet, she got very focused on Burke. I mean, that was our goal, was try to give him as normal a childhood as we could possibly give him amidst all this chaos that was going around us. We were afraid. Somebody had attacked our family. We don't know who it was. And we were frightened, quite frankly. And one of the challenges was we wanted to keep Burke out of video and pictures so that people would know what he looked like. And so how do we get him from, we were living with friends when we were in Boulder, so he could finish his school year. How do we get him to school without being photographed? And it became a project. And the way it was diversion from grieving. We would send out a decoy car. Burke would be in another car on the floor in the back seat.
Just to go to school?
Yeah, to go to school. And we'd get him to school unphotographed because we wanted to protect him.
Did you spot some of the themes that I spoke about there from John Ramsey as he's talking? The question is, why is it her everyone became fixated on? It's a question about Patsy. Why is it her everyone became fixated on? And he starts by answering the question. He says, I don't know, talks about Patsy being a strong woman, didn't come across very well on television, but a wonderful mother, a wonderful stepmother. And for her to take the brunt of that assault is just so unfair. Assault being an interesting word to use compared to the assault that happened to his daughter. So he does answer the question, but then he talks about focusing on Burke. He brings Burke into this. The question is about Patsy, and he starts talking about Burke and what they did to protect Burke, in his words. And he finishes off talking about Burke going to school because we wanted to protect him. The distance from the question, why did people become fixated on Patsy as a suspect in the murder of your daughter? What he finishes up by saying about he got to school without people taking photographs of him is large and massive. Why is he diverting? Why is he going on to talk about Burke, which is obviously either he wants to change the subject of the answer, or that is just something that he feels way more comfortable talking about than talking about the fixation people had on Patsy. Very interesting diversion there. Let's break that answer down a little bit more. Why is it her? Everyone became fixated on talking about Patsy, and he says, I don't know. That's his first words, I don't know. Now, I don't know is generally a reliable indicator of someone telling the truth. Truthful people don't mind saying, I don't know. Liars like to have an answer for everything. They like to pretend they've thought about everything, that there's some depth to their lies. So liars are more likely to go into a different sort of answer, try to persuade us or convince us of something, unlike people who are telling the truth have no problem saying, I don't know. And that's what he starts by saying, I don't know. He does pay a bit of tribute to Patsy, saying she was a very strong woman. Maybe she didn't come across so good on television. So I believe this is his answer, whether it's his truthful answer or whether it's something he wants to get across to us, maybe didn't come across so good on television. So that seems to me to be his answer. And then potentially, and we'll see why in a minute, he realizes that's not a nice thing to say about your dead wife, about the wife that has died, that has been a suspect in this murder, or not a suspect in the murder, but people think she might have done it. So he then says, I was told by people this. So he doesn't want to own that view. And I think maybe he does own the view that Patsy didn't come across very good on television. She didn't. And he's probably realised that in a moment of reflection. But he wants to talk nicely about Patsy, whether that is to convince everyone what a nice person she is and she couldn't possibly have done a murder, or whether that's just part of society. We don't like talking ill of the dead. He seems to want to remove himself from that opinion and say, I was told by people, which is part of this blaming things on other people, blaming bad things, blaming choices on other people. Interestingly, there he says, I was told by people, which is very unspecified, just people. Doesn't say whether it was friends, family, advisors, lawyers, PR people. We don't know what sort of people. When someone tells you that people have told them something, dig into it, because people is kind of a catch-all, and people can use people. That's maybe a bit of a roundabout way of saying it. Others can use the word people to blame their own opinions on. They don't want to say, this is my opinion, so they pretend it's the opinion of people. So I think not entirely true there, that one. He then eulogizes, but she was a wonderful mother. She was a wonderful stepmother. And I never heard her say anything negative about anybody. She was just a good person. This is a eulogy for a dead person. We have a norm in our society that we don't speak ill of the dead. We talk nicely about the dead. That doesn't mean we tell the truth about the dead then, because none of us are all good, none of us are all bad. And this, I don't think, is very much weight to it. I just think it's a eulogy for a dead person. And you can see that he talks in absolutes. So he's never heard anything, never heard her say anything negative about anybody. Really? Do you believe that? Do you believe that in all their married life, John Ramsey never, that is not once, not for one time, heard her say anything negative about anybody? Do you believe that? I don't. It's an absolute. So I think this is just bland platitudes that are coming out there. Also notice it's in the negative. It's not she always had good things to say about people, which would be a positive statement. It's in the negative. That shows where his focus is. So I actually think Patsy was well known for saying negative things about people. Maybe she kept that between her and John and didn't do it publicly. But I do believe that what he's letting out there is that Patsy's had negative things to say about people. Also, you'll just notice the distance that he puts in this as well. It's not that she never said anything negative about anybody, it's that he never heard her say that. So actually, when you break into his words, the truth is that Patsy, he, in his words, may well have said negative things about people. He's only saying if he never heard her do that. She was just a good person, and just is a word that indicates deception. She was just a good person. No one is all a good person like this there. We have to ask, why is he doing that? Is that part of our societal norms that we don't talk ill of the dead? Or is he doing some image management for Patsy? He doesn't want people to think Patsy is the murderer of JonBenet, and therefore he's going to say this blatantly false tribute to her. We've got another just, so for her to take the brunt of that assault is just so unfair. So this is a persuasive just so unfair. He could have left those two words out. For her to take the brunt of the assault is unfair, but he wants to show us how unfair it is. He wants to turn the severity up there. So it's just so unfair. So I think, again, what we're seeing here, slight little bits of deception. Now, not all deception is malicious, but he doesn't think it's that unfair. He understands why people at least became fixated on Patsy. Partly her character might not have always been perfect, and partly she didn't come across very well on television. That's what he's saying. He goes on to say, when we lost JonBenet, she got very focused on Burke, and this is his off-ramp. This is where the diversion starts. So he has answered the question. I will give him credit points for answering the question, but he then takes this off-ramp. from JonBenet and getting focused on Burke. And then from this point on, he will only talk about Burke in this answer. He's taken the off-ramp from the highway and gone onto a road that he feels much safer on. What's interesting is that he says when we lost JonBenet, she got very focused on Burke. So that is just Patsy. She got very focused on Burke. But the end says, I mean that our goal, so that's him and Patsy, was to try and give him as normal a childhood as we could amidst all the chaos that was going on around us. So while the first thing he says is she got focused on Burke, interestingly, when he talks about what happened with Burke, it's a joint action. It's not just Patsy doing it, it's him and Patsy. So again, I think he wants to say, yes, she was a loving mum and really got focused on Burke. But when he actually talks about the focus that was on Burke, it wasn't just Patsy, it was Patsy and him. He talks about this happening amid all the chaos that was going on around us. And we've got that theme of chaos that he is going to use time and time and time again. Interestingly, that chaos was going around us. They weren't part of the chaos. The chaos was happening around them as he sees it. But the chaos was not, they were like the eye of the storm, calm and quiet, because the chaos wasn't involving them. It was going on around them. A nice bit of honesty, though. He says that they wanted to give Burke as normal a childhood as we could possibly give him. So he's not overly trying to persuade us there and saying we wanted him to, we gave him the most normal childhood possible. In there, as we could possibly give him, there's some vagueness there, could and possibly vague words. So just there in his words, he is not saying to us that we gave Burke a very normal childhood. He's saying Burke's childhood wasn't normal, but it was as normal as possible. He then goes on to say, we were afraid somebody had attacked our family, and then goes on to talk about all this photography. Now, this is his safer ground. He's taken that off-ramp onto this safe road that he feels really safe and comfortable talking about what they did with Burke after the murder. But even here, he's got some stress because he's stuttering, starting a thought and then going back and giving us another thought. Like, we did what? He doesn't say, but he says we were afraid at the end of it. We were afraid. One of the challenges was how, and then he doesn't say how do what. He says, we wanted to keep Burke out of video and pictures, and that's very stop-start. How do we get him from we were living with friends? So again, we've got a restart and thought there. In a way, it was a diversion. So again, he's thinking his words through carefully here, but there's a bit of stress and stuttery there. It was a diversion from grieving. We'd sent out a decoy car, so we've got lots of indications of stress and picking his words carefully. In all of this section, really we have a lot of detail. I think that detail is padding. He could have told this story a hell of a lot shorter without just adding in some of the detail about decoy cars and so on. And I think this is padding. This is somewhere that he feels safe and secure talking. So he's moved the conversation from everyone being fixated on Patsy through to this nice, comfortable place of talking about what they did with Burke. And because it's nice and comfortable, I'm going to add extra words in here, add more detail in here, because I'm much more comfortable talking here than on the subject I was asked about, which is the fixation on Patsy. At the very beginning of this section, he says, we were afraid somebody had attacked our family. We don't know who it was. Now, we've got that attack word there, but it's attacked our family. Now, that means he must see the murder of JonBenet as an attack on the family. Why is that? Potentially the ransom note, we would go with that, but this was an attack on your daughter, and this could be got across, the same concept could be got across with someone had attacked our daughter. We didn't know who was next or if they'd come for us, but he's very explicit there that he sees the murder of JonBenet as an attack on our family. And he uses the phrase, we don't know, again, which I've said can be very honest. We don't know who it was. But there's a moral of the story here from John Ramsey when he talks, which is everyone else is bad and we are good. The photographers that wanted to take the picture, the person that attacked the family, they are bad. Look how good we are as a family. And you will see this moral repeated again and again and again. Watch out for it. He doesn't mention what they were grieving for. He says all this stuff that they did with Burke was a diversion from grieving, but it doesn't say this was grieving for JonBenet or grieving for our daughter at all. He just talks about grieving. He doesn't quite say what they were grieving, and you'll notice that JonBenet has come away here, Patsy has come away here, and this is all now a story about Burke. By the way, he mentions they were living with friends, a very common concept that he talks about his friends a hell of a lot. John Ramsey says that the couple were afraid. They were afraid because someone had attacked our family. And then he talks about something else. He talks about protecting Burke from photographers. This is really interesting because mentioning how afraid they were, I think, is maybe justification for the rest of what they did. But it doesn't quite come across like that because the fear has come from the attack. But the measures that were taken because of that fear, in his words, those are measures to thwart the media, to thwart photographers. That bit doesn't just quite hang together. Right, let's get some more from the interview.
Did you guys have any moments with him where you're asking, I think about like kids, like what are the things that the parents don't know? Like what's happening?
No. You know your children.
Well, and I'm not necessarily talking about like him doing something, but I'm saying like, they hang out together. They have the same group of friends. Like, was there someone that maybe she didn't tell mom and dad about, but she's going to tell her brother about, or her brother? Like, did you guys have any of those like moments with Burke to be like help us figure this out?
No, because we really just wanted him to be separated from it, from the chaos, and we wanted him to be normal, and that was very difficult because being followed around by the media and going through the grocery store line and seeing your sister's picture on the front of the tabloid, it was difficult to give him a normal life.
Do you think he might still know something that he doesn't even know he knows?
No. Burke's a very solid person, despite all. And went to college, graduated, had a good job ever since. Well thought of by his employers and very, very disciplined. Buys used cars and, he's a good adult. He was a good son. If he knew anything, it would not be something he would thought
is important.
This is quite a bizarre section here. The first question is, did you guys have any moments with him where you were like asking the question? And that's asked again twice there. Did you have any moments with Burke to be like, help us figure this out? And John Ramsey both times says no, but then takes this off-ramp again where he starts talking about it was difficult to give him a normal life. Why is he running from that question? Why is he running away from the question of, did you ask Burke if he knew anything, if he observed anything, if he saw anything? John runs up the off-ramp here, starts talking again about the media and talking about how difficult it was to give Burke a normal life. Again, we've got this off-ramp, we've got this diversion away from the subject in hand and onto something that John obviously feels safer talking about. So let's dig down into it. Did you guys have any moments where you're asking like, what's happening? And he says, no, you know your children well. So he starts off by answering the question, and it's a yes/no question. Did you have any moments with him? Yes, we did. No, we didn't. I don't know, would be another plausible answer. And he says no. He says no twice. Now, in almost every episode I do, when we look at someone who's very suspicious, I will point out how they are asked yes or no questions. That is, questions that could be answered yes, questions that could be answered no, and they don't say yes or no in their answer. Instead, they give a bit of a story. Well, he says straight away, no. Straight away, no. And that must be to his credit. He says, you know your children well. You know your children well. He's not saying, we know Burke well, or I know Burke well. He's telling the interviewer how well they know their children. Why is he doing that? Why is he not talking about Burke? The question's about Burke, but the answer is about our kids. You know your children well. That sometimes can be socializing. That can be, well, how would you be? you would trust your kids, wouldn't you? You know, just think about it. You're accusing me of, something here, or asking a question that's a bit personal, a bit deep. Well, how would you feel if that question was asked to you? Or how would you feel if you were in that situation? That can be one reason for using that form of answer. The other one is, it's diversion. I am going to talk about my child. I'm going to talk about your child instead. Once more, the questions. Did you guys have any of those like moments with Burke to be like, help us figure this out? And his first word, once more, is no. I like that. That is a sign of honesty. A bizarre sign of honesty, as we'll come to talk about in a minute, but I do believe that's a sign of honesty. Then we get some persuasive action. No, because we really just wanted him to be separated from the chaos. Now, again, these are words you could take out because they're persuasive. He doesn't want to tell us what happened. He wants to tell us this is really what happened, and just. So he's focusing our attention on just the one thing that happened. It was chaos, but just this one thing happened, and they wanted him to be separated from the chaos. He's trying too hard to persuade us there of his reasons with the words really just. He mentions the chaos again. It's a word he uses a lot to describe events on the day after Christmas, December the 26th, 1996. He talks about that day being chaos. He said that we wanted him to be normal. There's an indication that things were not normal because they wanted to move towards normality, towards things being normal. So there's an indication there in his words, for some reason, that things were not normal. Then he talks about the being followed around by the media, about the fact you'd be standing in a store line and you would see your sister on the front of a tabloid. The moral of the story is there once more. Everyone else is bad. We, the Ramseys, are good. There is one thing I really like in this answer, though, when he's talking about seeing JonBenet's picture on the front of a tabloid in a grocery store. He says, seeing your sister's picture on the front of a tabloid. So he's actually telling the story from Burke's point of view. John isn't saying how hard it was for him to see his daughter's picture on the front of a tabloid, and it may well be hard for him to do that, but he's not talking about that. He's not looking for the sympathy there. He's looking for the sympathy for Burke and how hard it would be on the grocery store line seeing your sister's picture on the front of a tabloid. The questions go on. Do you think he might know something like he doesn't even know he knows? Once more, it's no. No. Now, he doesn't say no twice, which is maybe trying a little bit too hard. But once more, John is asked a yes or no question by the interviewer, and he says no. And then he goes on to give us a resume, I guess, of Burke. But it's really quite odd. He talks about Burke being a very solid person. That's not exactly glowing praise, is it? Just try to think about how you'd feel if one of your parents, the first word they chose to describe you was solid. And also, he's disciplined, which again, it's not. It's all very self-contained, isn't it? It's all very inside. It's not outward-looking. It's not about the personality being anything other than solid and disciplined. And also, on an interview that's going to be seen by, I don't know, tens, hundreds of thousands, even millions, one of his plus points is that Burke buys used cars. Apparently that's a good thing. I don't know why it's a good thing. Is it a frugal thing? That's just playing to John's love and focus on money. But Burke buys used cars. Maybe if you've got any more in that, you could let me know in the comments if you can. Burke buys used cars. What I do see is this is process driven. When John talks about the good things about his son Burke, it's all very process driven. There's no emotional things in there at all. It's just all about the process that he goes through, graduating college, got a good job, well thought of by his employers. Very, very process driven. We see this a lot in Men versus Women. Men want to be a little bit more buttoned down. They want to talk about the good processes that their children have or their loved ones have. Women will be a little bit more around emotions and feelings and relationships, how they relate to the world. I was interested when he said he was a good son. Now that's in the past tense, and it made me think: is he no longer a good son? Because Burke's always going to be John's son. He was a good son in the past tense, but I think this is something to do with the phrase that comes before it, which is he's a good adult and he was a good son. I think that is something to do with it. I think he means son as in young child type of son. But interestingly, the first thought he has was he is present tense a good adult, and then he feels like he has to add he was a good son. And then in all of this, so the question is, do you think he might still know something? And if it's important, it might not be something that's important. He doesn't really want to deal with it. We've got this lack of curiosity again. The fact that he has not, in his words, had any conversation of any depth looking at the words of Burke, what Burke knows, what Burke experienced. And that just gets me, that there is such a lack of curiosity expressed verbally by John to find out if there's missing anything, to find out if there's a puzzle piece missing. It's very, very, very interesting, this lack of curiosity that John Ramsey has. So what are you thinking then so far? Still to come, we're going to look at more of John talking about Burke, including about the time that Burke became a real suspect in the eyes of many people that follow the JonBenét Ramsey case, and how John talks about that is very, very interesting. If you are a member of the channel or a subscriber on Spotify, by the way, I'm going to look at more in this Crime Junkie interview very shortly in an exclusive episode for members or subscribers on Spotify. We'll look at how John deals with the 911 call and the ransom note questions, and also how he talks about his friend Fleet White, who didn't find JonBenét's body that morning, even though Fleet White apparently looked in the room where JonBenet was and where John found JonBenet later on that day. So that is coming soon. And if you want more on the JonBenét Ramsey case, you can look for the episodes where I look at the ransom note and ask who wrote that ransom note, and also one breaking down Patsy Ramsey's 911 call to report JonBenet missing, presumed abducted at the time. So you can look out for those on this channel. If you want to subscribe, then that means you will get more episodes like this as soon as they are released. But you feel free to share this. I mean, it is a huge unsolved mystery. And I think what John says is shining some light on what happened, as you'll see when we come to our conclusions. Always interested in your comments. You can let me know here on this platform if you can, or get in touch on social media. All the links are in the show notes. And if you want to become a member on YouTube or a subscriber on Spotify, that means you get episodes like this before anyone else, and exclusive episodes, including the one where I look at more of this interview with John Ramsey, especially how he talks about their ransom, about the 911 call, and about Fleet White. That is coming soon. You become a channel member on YouTube or a subscriber on Spotify to get them. Let's have some more now from the interview with John Ramsey.
I wonder if there's something in there, like, even, so I know in the Dr. Phil, one of the things that came out was the idea that you used a flashlight to put him to sleep, and that he came back down to play with a toy. Like, when he's down and people are sleeping, has he ever talked, like, did he get the sense that someone else was in the home? Did he hear anything? I don't know how long was he up?
No, we've never asked him that. I don't know. I didn't know, frankly, that he got up again. I'm not sure he did. Again, that's fiction. There's so much fiction out there.
Because it's just thrown out there. It's just Dr. Phil who says, you got up to play with a toy, and Burke says, yeah, I did. It was something that I wanted to put together. And then it kind of just like
well,
away.
You know, again, when we got home, JonBenet had fallen asleep.
I know you and Burke came.
I put her to bed. Burke and I sat down and tried to put together one of his little toys for a little while, just because he wanted to, and then he went off to bed.
You're saying, like, that whatever Dr. Phil said and Burke said on the show, he didn't come back down?
I didn't know that he came back down, if he did.
Does stuff like that make you want to be like, oh my gosh, maybe there's something he knows?
Burke would have said something if something was weird, but
okay.
He may have misunderstood the question,
sure.
too.
Wow. So here we're talking about Burke and his Dr. Phil interview. And it's put to John Ramsey. Do you know how long he was up? Burke was apparently up on the night that JonBenet was murdered. Do you know how long he was up? And John says, we never asked him that. We've got that lack of curiosity again. I mean, my jaw is dropping here. He says once more that something has come to light that could help shed some light on what happened to his murdered daughter, and he has not asked any more questions about it. He's not dug into it to try and find out what happened. The lack of curiosity is astounding for me. By the way, I said John never asked him any more, and that's true, but he says we've never asked him that. Who's we've? We don't know. Was it him and Patsy? Never asked Burke about that. Or is it John and his team? I don't know, but I'm interested in we've never asked him about that. Potentially, again, this is this relying on friends thing. Is it friends, advisors? Now, he does talk about, how long he was up, and he says, I don't know. That's that thing that I'm always impressed by, someone saying, I don't know. But then he says, right after that, I didn't know. So I don't know. I didn't know. That's in the past. That would mean that you now know. And then he says, I'm not sure he did. So with 3 levels of certainty there. I don't know. I didn't know. I'm not sure that he did. And then he goes blanket and gives a 4th level, which is that's fiction. So I don't know, I didn't know, I'm not sure he did, and then that's fiction. What's going on there? Is it that he's floundering a bit and trying to say, I need to say that this isn't true. I need to say it's not true that Burke got up again, but he gets to it by floundering. I don't know, I didn't know, I'm not sure I did. That's fiction. Or is that certainty in that's fiction to enable this off-ramp again? So you'll notice that he's asked this sensitive question, and what he wants to do is move it on to how much fiction is out there. That's his off-ramp. What he wanted to do there, but he gets interrupted, was once more the sensitive questions being asked, and instead of answering it and just leaving it at that, he wants to go on to his narrative. He wants to take the off-ramp onto his safe road and talk about how much fiction is out there. Fiction put out there by the media, by the police, and so on. But he gets interrupted, and it's put to him again that Burke says that he got up that night. And John Ramsey's first words are, well, again. And then he says, when we got home, JonBenet had fallen asleep, right? So, well, when someone answers a question with well, it means I'm going to tell you something. Look, pay attention here. I'm going to tell you why that's a bad question. I'm going to tell you why you need to listen to my answer. Well is a bit of a commanding word, a bit of a controlling word at the start of an answer. It means you're going to be surprised by the answer here. It's not quite in line with the question you asked. I know more than you. I'm going to explain my answer to you. Well. Then he says, now, lots of people use as a filler word. You'll hear lots of people talking and going, and this is not that sort of This is, It's a controlling language. It's used a lot by coercive controllers, the phrase, So he's telling Ashley, the interviewer, this. Okay, this, so don't argue with this. So we've got the well, and we've got the and then he says again. Well, again. Now, again, is something that liars use. People who are lying think they need to repeat the lie, and think the fact they have repeated the lie makes it more credible. The more often you say it, the more credible it becomes. So he's saying, I've said this before. Again, I've said this before. So this all is very, very concerning. Well, again. This is all about Burke getting up again in the night. When we got home, JonBenet had fallen asleep. The interviewer says, I know, and you and Burke came, and he interrupts. And he says, I put her to bed. Burke and I sat down and tried to put together one of his little toys for a little while just because he wanted to, and then he went off to bed. Now, so many things in this very short answer. First of all, I put her to bed. Now, this is an indication of a truthful line. There's nothing in there that doesn't need to be there. There's nothing in there that's extra or persuading us or convincing us that this is true. It's very factual. It's got all the subjects in it that you need. I, the person, put her, another person, to bed. What happened? It's just a very, very clean sentence. I believe it. I put her to bed. Then Burke and I sat down. Now, when we talk in language about where we are, especially sitting or standing, that can denote tension at the time when we talk about sitting or standing, because there is no need for him to say sat down here. We don't really need to know whether they did it sitting, standing, where they were, or anything like that. We just need to know this is what happened. So for him to mention sat down suggests some tension at that point there. Potentially more tension because they didn't put together one of his little toys. They tried to put together one of his little toys. Tried suggests failure there. So they tried to put together one of the little toys, but that suggests to me that the toy was not put together. So we've got this tension and we've got this failure on that night as well. We've got little mentioned twice, one of his little toys for a little while. And in this section, when John is talking about Burke, he's going to say the word little a lot. I don't know why, but he says little a lot. One of his little toys for a little while. And then just because he wanted to. So he's giving us the reason why this happened. Now, why? It's Christmas night. Why do we need a reason for this man to be playing toys with his son? Just because he wanted to. I've got that word just, which always pings my radar. Little toys for a little while, just because he wanted to. Really? Is that the only reason? Just makes me think there was other things going on. And then he went off to bed, which is interesting because Burke went off to bed. So Burke put himself to bed there. But in contrast to I put her to bed. There's a difference in age. I get that. But just look at there how the same concept can reveal so much. Burke took himself off to bed. I put her to bed. But I suggest on that night there was there was some tension in what was going on between John and Burke that night. We've got this lack of curiosity. You're saying that whatever Dr. Phil said on the show, he didn't come back down. He says, I wouldn't know if he did come back down. Does stuff like that make you want to be like, oh my gosh, maybe there's something he knows. Burke would have said something if something was weird. It's an insane lack of curiosity. Why are these guys not having that conversation? We have some more uncertainty about whether John thinks that Burke came down or not. He says, I didn't know that he came back down, if he did. So we do have he came back down, we have I didn't know, and it's the if he did. For some reason, John does not know what his son Burke did that night for certain, because there's so many ways this is stated uncertainly that he does not know what what Burke did that night, and he does not want to find out the answer. Why is that?
In 2016, when everyone started looking at Burke, and that's become like the big story now.
That's absolutely insane. Burke was a 60-pound, 9-year-old little boy. This was a violent assault. Even the police immediately said no. He was interviewed by a child psychologist, which I guess is normal, for 2 days early on, and they said no, absolutely no way. He wasn't aware of anything that happened, and certainly wasn't the killer. And so that's just absurd foolishness.
What was your thinking that morning when you're getting him out of the home? Because I know you guys go to check on him. You think he's still sleeping. He says when he does his Dr. Phil that he's awake, but he's, clearly there's something going on. He's like, I'm not messing with it. I just am like waiting till they come and get me. Mm-hmm. Why did you guys want him to not be in that environment? Well,
the police were there. It was craziness. He was a little boy. We wanted him safe and protected, and he took some of his Christmas presents with him and went to stay with a friend in his house. It was a way to get him out of this nightmare into a safe place.
Did you guys feel like he was safe? I think was it hard? Because I think it would be hard for me to I'm missing one child. Like, I don't know if you could get me to let go of the other one.
Yeah, well, no, we trusted our friends. They were good friends. Their son was Burke's age. They were buddies. They'd been friends for a long time. It was a safe place for him to go.
Did they have, because Fleet took him away, but then Fleet comes back, right? But were his in-laws or something at the house? So there was like someone there with the kids? 30 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know. It was chaos that morning, and I really thought I could get JonBenet back. I really did.
So it's 2016, everyone starts looking at Burke. That is the question that's put to John Ramsey, and the question is not allowed to finish. He interrupts to take over the narrative. Now, why do we do that? Is it to shut down that line of questioning, or is it because he's got something already planned to say? I mean, this is 28 years he's been telling this story, so is he all ready to go with his pre-prepared version of events, which could be truthful, but he really wants to get in there fast. Whatever happens, he interrupts the question. He has no time for the question. He has more time for saying what it is that he wants to say. We have lots of John Ramsey's themes in this answer, including the word little again. Burke was a 60-pound, 9-year-old little boy. But in John Ramsey's favour, he doesn't downplay what happened to JonBenet, his daughter. Often, when people are guilty of a crime, they'll underplay what happened. Instead of saying, I didn't murder anyone, they'll say, I didn't do it. But he talks about what kind of assault happened to JonBenet. He talks about the violence of the assault as well. And he says that Burke wasn't the killer. So there is really something admirable there, something to look at in his words there and say he's not downplaying what happened. He's not trying to soften the severity at all of what happened to his daughter. That severity softening is something that we would see often from guilty people. We're not seeing it there from John Ramsey. What we are seeing is a lot of ly words that end in ly. These are persuasive words used to turn up the severity of what we're saying. So John Ramsey could have said that that's insane, but instead he says that's absolutely insane, as if that makes it more insane, even though it can only be insane or not insane. But he's saying it's absolutely insane. The police didn't just say no, Burke's not involved. They immediately said no, and it's very important for him to use these persuasive words to show us that Burke was not involved in this at all. The police immediately said no. And then in the early days, absolutely no way has he. So again, we've got this absolutely. And certainly he wasn't the killer. Not just he wasn't the killer, but he certainly wasn't the killer. We've also not just got foolishness, it's absurd foolishness. So he's using words, and he's using extra words that are not needed to change the meaning of what he's saying, but to persuade us of this fact. His words are working very hard to persuade us of the fact that Burke should not have been considered a suspect. He talks about the police immediately saying, no way could Burke be involved. The police immediately said no. Now, all the way through this hour-and-a-half interview, John Ramsey has no good words for the police at all. And several police officers that he's come across, and the police in general, no good words for them at all. But he will believe the police when it suits him. He will use what the police say as evidence, I guess, when it suits him. Like there, the police immediately said no. So then he is asked about why on the morning that JonBenet was, when she was missing, did they get Burke out of the house? And his explanation for it is that there was a lot of craziness. We wanted him safe and protected. We wanted him to go with friends. We wanted him to get away from the nightmare. We have the John Ramsey moral of the story. Again, everyone else is bad. We are good. While all these bad things were happening, we were doing good and trying to protect our son. More of the common themes from John Ramsey. We went to stay, or Burke went to stay with a friend in his house, with this repetition, this leaning on friends again, which is something very common for John Ramsey to do. He mentions little again. He was a little boy. We wanted him safe and protected. We have that repetition of the word little. What I'm interested in here in this description was that he says that they got Burke out of the house, and it was when the police were there. The police were there in the house, and yet the police were there. There's rarely a time that your house is more safe and protected than if the police are there looking at the house very, very closely, and lots of police were there as well. So there's very rarely a time your house would be more safe and protected than when the police are there en masse. But for some reason, that didn't feel safe to John and Patsy, because they wanted to get him out of this nightmare and into a safe place. So in his words, even though the police were there, they did not consider that the house was a safe place. and he's asked, did you guys feel it was safe? And the interviewer says, like, if that was my child that was missing, I'm not sure that I would let go of another child, let them out of my sight at that moment. And he says, yeah. Now, I don't know what that yeah is to, because it could be two meanings here. It could be yes, we felt he was safe, or it could be an empathetic yeah, I get what you're saying there. Whichever way, it works out quite well. And if it is, it's a yes-no question. Did you guys feel like he was safe? And his first word is yeah. We see that quite a lot from John, that truthful indicator of saying yes or no to a yes-no question. And the reason he felt it was safe, this is this leaning on friends thing again that John's got. We trusted our friends. They were good friends. Their son was Burke's age and they were buddies. They've been friends for a long time. It was a safe place to go. So this repetition of friends in the words of John Ramsey and leaning on friends as well. And then this is a very curious section. Now, the question is a bit jumbled in the way it was asked, but it was basically, you sent Burke away to these friends, but was there an adult there? Was there someone there with the kids? And John Ramsey's answer is no answer at all. He pauses. You can see his mind whirring while he thinks. What is he doing? Is he thinking, do I tell a lie and just say yes? Or is it that he's thinking, what was happening? It's a long time ago, I can't remember. Or is he thinking, what is the correct thing for me to say in this situation? I don't know, but the fact there was no answer is very telling. He's given an out by the interviewer, sadly, who says it was a long time ago. And he says, yeah, I don't know. We've got that I don't know again. Generally an indication of truthful. Then he says, it was chaos that morning. And again, it's that controlling language. It's not just him saying, you believe me, take me at my word, it was chaos that morning. He's using that controlling language and saying, it was chaos that morning. Don't question this. This is something you know. I'm not telling you this. This is something that you know. Repetition again of chaos. He really wants to get across that morning was chaos. And then one of the most worrying things that John Ramsey says for me, he finishes that answer off by saying, I really thought I could get JonBenet back. I really did. I cannot tell you how many red flags that raises. And it's not the only time he uses those words in that whole hour-and-a-half interview. At least once he says the exact same words again. I really thought I could get JonBenet back. I really did. Now, number one red flag for me is this is completely irrelevant to what he was asked. He was asked, did you feel that, was Burke with adults, basically, when you put him away from the house that morning? And he says, talks about that, but what he isn't asked about is whether he thought he could get JonBenet back or not. He has mentioned it without being asked. It's important for him to say. It's something that he wants to get across, and he's crowbarring it into the answer that he's got here. I really thought I could get JonBenet back. I really did. So that's one red flag about it. It's extra. It's not needed. He hasn't been asked about this whatsoever. And then it's that repetition of the word really. I really thought I could get JonBenet back. I really did. He could say that sentence and it would mean the same thing without the word really. I thought I could get JonBenet back. I did. But no, it's that repetition. I really thought. So not just thought, but I really thought. He's trying to convince us that that is what he was thinking at the time. Why? Why is he trying to convince us that? Why doesn't he just tell us it straight? I thought I could get JonBenet back. But instead, it's this persuasive language and he wasn't asked about it. And it really, really worries me because there are so many red flags for deception just in that one concept, that one part of the answer. I really thought I could get JonBenet back. I really did. So those are the words of John Ramsey. What are my conclusions after having listened to the full hour and a half of the interview and also digging into what we've looked at in the analysis there? First thing, Burke is John's safe place. He's very comfortable talking about Burke. So comfortable that sometimes when he's asked about Patsy and events of that morning, he moves and talks about Burke instead. Now, why is that? I think it's his safe place. He's very comfortable talking about it, but is that just because he feels comfort in talking about Burke because it doesn't raise any stress? It's something he can talk about naturally. Burke has been his son for a long time now, so is it something that he just feels comfortable talking about? Or is there a sense of creating safety safety and protection for Burke, because that's in a lot of what he says. Making Burke feel safe and protected is a theme of John Ramsey's. So does he talk about Burke a lot to provide safety for him and to provide protection for him? But certainly, talking about Burke is something that is a safe place for John. He likes to do it. I know you're all screaming about theories. You want to know, do I think, is John the killer? Did John kill his daughter, JonBenét Ramsey? I can't see anything in his words that suggest that. I can't see anything in his words that suggest the guilty knowledge, hiding the fact he is a killer, covering his tracks, skipping over anything that he did that night. I can't see anything in John Ramsey's words that would suggest that to me that he killed his daughter. However, when he's talking, I see deceptive indicators when he talks about that night and when he talks about the next day. I thought I'd get her back. I really did. When he talks about the tension that night, or he doesn't talk about the tension that night. When he talks about that night, there was some tension, even though, as he's telling the story, JonBenet's in bed and he's playing toys on Christmas night with his son. I see tension and I see failure there. I see avoidance from him talking too much about that night as well. He doesn't want to do it. So I see deceptive indicators when he talks about that night. He's got a personal issue with the police, and the issue with the police is not that they haven't found the killer of his daughter. It's not that they're not investigating to try and find who is the killer of his daughter. His issue with the police is that the police suspected him, and the police suspected his wife, Patsy, at times of murdering the daughter. That is a personal issue with the police. He really doesn't have a hard time with the fact that they haven't found the killer. The big thing for me, though, is he shows no curiosity about what happened. He says he never asked Burke to give him any extra details or say, Burke, is there something we don't know? Is there anything you can say that might help us? He says he's never asked those questions. Even when he saw Dr. Phil, and he saw Burke say things that he'd never heard of before, he didn't ask any further questions. And listen, when he says he didn't ask those further questions, the language there is very truthful. So I suggest that he did not ask Burke, and he has not asked Burke these deeper, further questions. Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Why throughout that hour-and-a-half interview does he show no curiosity about what happened to his daughter that night? No curiosity whatsoever. Well, there's one reason for that. In my opinion, he knows way more about what happened that night in his house than he has ever said. Possibly that involves a member of his family. I do wonder if friends are involved as well, because he talks about friends a lot. And that leaning on friends thing. Whatever it is, in my opinion, from looking only at the words of John Ramsey, I think he knows way more about what happened to his daughter than he has ever said publicly. If you become a channel member, or if you subscribe to this program on Spotify, you will get a bonus episode soon on the words of John Ramsey, including this very curious thing that he says.
And I gave that card to a friend, I don't know who it was, somebody was there. I said, go get the money. And they came back and didn't get the money. And I was like, why didn't you get the money? They're like, well, no, we don't need to do that yet.
Why did he say that? What's that all about? If you become a member of the channel on YouTube or subscribe on Spotify, then you will get a bonus episode looking at more words of John Ramsey. What are your thoughts? Do let me know in the comments if you can on this platform, or if you want to share this with other people, feel free to do so. That helps the word get out. And who is not interested in this unsolved cold case, the murder of JonBenét Ramsey? And if that's too much for you, that like button, 0.3 of a second it takes to press the like button, and that helps this get out to more people as well. Neveratruerword.com is the website. Now there you will find more episodes about the JonBenét Ramsey case. You will also find podcasts, videos analysing the words of people in the news, including many unsolved crimes. You can sign up for the monthly newsletter, or even join the Facebook group and find a new way of discussing what the words that people say really mean. Neveratruerword.com. And we'll see you soon for something new from Never a Truer Word.